Hello, friends, and welcome to a very special episode of the Between You and Me podcast. My name is Jessica Morris. I'm an Australian music journalist, and normally, every episode, I talk to a music maker, a creative, about the things that hurt, heal, and change us in church culture. We've been doing that solidly for 6, nearly 7 years now. But if you've been following the news, and particularly the Christian music news of late, you may have noticed some quite significant news pop up regarding Michael Tait and the Newsboys. And if you've been a long-time listener, you may have also noticed that I'm the journalist who broke those stories with the Roy's Report. So today is an extra special episode sharing an interview that I recently did with my local radio station where we actually discussed this and giving me a chance to connect with you guys, update you, tell you how long I've been working on this and giving you a few answers to maybe questions that you have. So hang tight and let's get to it. Welcome to the Between You and Me podcast. Longtime friends and maybe first-time listeners who are just trying to get an insight. Like I said in the intro, I'm Jessica Morris. Now, you guys know me as an Australian music journalist. I am based near Melbourne in Australia, or Melbourne if you are American. You call it either way. And I'm primarily known in some small regard for doing this podcast, very small. I've worked with some non-profits before in Australia. I've done some freelance journalism for some major and smaller media outlets. So I am not well known by people beyond our small Between You and Me community as such. And yet, on June 4, if you have been following the news, I know there's a lot of it lately, you will have seen an article that was released by the Roy's Report. And that article was about allegations regarding former Newsboys lead singer Michael Tait allegedly sexually assaulting 3 men between the years of 2005 to 2014. And I'm the journalist who wrote that story. So I wanted to come and talk to you guys about it. You are my family. We have been doing this interview, this live thing together for years, right? And I know that when we started the Between You and Me podcast, we started with the mission to have real, honest conversations with people in the Christian community, with people in the Christian music culture, because like I've said to you guys many times, back when I lived in Nashville, I was so hung up or confronted by what I was seeing in terms of the underbelly of Christian music, right? I was meeting wonderful people, but I was hearing stories about people who were disillusioned with the church or disillusioned and burnt from their experiences in the Christian music industry because it is so hard to balance industry and livelihood and spirituality and faith and power, and how all these things weave together. It's something that really only people who are in the Christian music industry and really artists or people who are sort of in the business side of it, really, they all have to grapple with it in some way. As a journalist, and especially like as an Australian journalist who lives primarily in Australia, it's something that I've had, I guess, the privilege of seeing and observing in some ways, but I know that it's like nearly an outside look at it. And so the best way to understand people and the best way to understand their disillusionment or their love for their craft or the way they've pushed through is to talk to them, right? And so that's what the Between You and Me podcast is and was. It's a chance to talk to music makers about these things. So you're probably wondering, in that space, when did I come across the Michael Tait story? Now, if you've read the story at the Roy's Report, if you haven't yet, I'm going to ask you to pause and go and read that now. You'll find it at julieroys.com. Now, a heads up, there's a trigger warning there for you. It is quite graphic. So catch up, read the article and come back. All right, we're good? Great, welcome back. So you're probably wondering, how did I get this lead, right? Because what we did in the article is we described this, and this is what multiple sources said to me. This is Nashville's worst kept secrets. I think The Guardian also had a version of that quote from other sources that they had in their article that came out about a week later. Because the thing is that everyone in Nashville has been talking about about Michael Tait for a long time, but the context of what they've talked about is different depending on what circles you're in. So in some places, people are talking about sexuality, and in other places, people are talking about sexual assault allegations. In some places, there is crossover, but what I've found is that really, depending who you're spending time with in Nashville, how powerful you are in Nashville, and sort of like what echelon of influence you have is probably going to determine how much you're hearing, if that makes any sense. And that's partly because these stories are shared by survivors basically in really close confines. It's on tour, it's on the road, it's after really late nights and early mornings, and it's done when you are so vulnerable. And so what we have is survivors who have shared these stories, if they have, and often it takes quite a few years, but they've shared these stories with people who are close to them and who they trust in these quarters. And in some cases, some of these stories have spread and created rumours. Other cases, it sort of just stayed within those camps. And if you spend any time in Nashville and Christian music, you know there's a few really powerful camps around. They're held by different record labels, different families, sort of different artists, and everyone sort of falls into a different camp. And in the middle of it, you have a bunch of independent contractors and crew. And some of them find their way into those camps, and others sort of float between. And that's not a bad thing, it's just how Nashville works. So when it came to these stories about Tait, it was really a case of everyone having a sense that something was, I don't want to say wrong, but something was different. There was something there, but not everyone, in fairness, had an idea of how troubling this was. And because of that, that's one of the reasons it's taken so long for this story to break. Because of this, stories about Michael Tait, rumours, speculation, while everyone has had a sense that maybe something is different, not everyone has had a sense or a knowledge of how deep this goes. Some people have and may not have spoken about it, but others have and have done all they can in their power to address it or maybe protect their own people if they knew the context of what they were talking about. So in many ways, while this story that I broke with the Roy's Report was shocking for a lot of people, and I know it's been shocking to a lot of people who are close to Michael or close to like his circles, like his church circles and things like that. I know there's a lot of shock and pain there. For other people, there hasn't been shock. This has been expected. And some say expected since Michael left the Newsboys in January, but I know for other people, they've been waiting for this sort of story for years. And so somehow in all that, it fell into my lap. Honestly, I didn't go searching for this story. If you've heard my story before, it's basically that I wasn't planning on becoming an investigative journalist. It was really only after this story dropped that I was like, well, I guess that's part of my job now. It's part of my work title, right? I've always gone by music journalist. But this story was presented to me or shared with me in trust by some people that I really knew and respected in the Christian music industry. And because of that, and there were solid leads, there was solid evidence to go with it. There was something that I need to follow. And from what I was hearing, no one else was following that lead, or no one else had been able to, or they tried and it hadn't worked for some reason. And so it felt like my duty to tug on this string and see where it took me. And to be honest with you, I didn't know it was going to take me 2.5 years. I didn't know it would be this hard or this emotionally draining. And I didn't know how much courage this would require. And I'm not just talking about me, I'm talking about my sources. But when I said yes, and once you start to hear people's stories, like, you know, we have every episode, we have a conversation with someone on here. It's quite vulnerable. It's in the public space, but it's quite vulnerable. You get to know someone, you feel like there's a connection there. There's a sense of sacred to someone's story, how God has met them in their moment of crisis. You meet them in that. And as a journalist, I still have like a professional stance to that when I'm listening to someone and hearing their story, but I honor that. I believe in how sacred someone's individual story is. And so when it regards allegations like this, and it's such a sense of injustice and pain and hurt, as a human, as a Christian, as a journalist, it feels like my duty to do something about it. And I'm not the only one who does things about these things. There have been other people for years doing what is right and good and true behind the scenes and trying to get this out there. And finally on June 4 it happened. So what you're about to hear is an interview that I did with my friend Aidan. Now, Aidan is a host and a producer at my local Christian radio station, 96.3. Now, 96.3 has been a long-time Christian radio station in my small city. They do fantastic work. And Aidan, if you probably actually recognise his voice if you listen to the show, because every episode of Between You and Me, we have an advertisement for a show that is called Songs That Changed You. And that is hosted by Aidan Grant. And so what you're about to hear is an interview that I did with Aidan approximately 2 or 3 days after the story about Tait broke. Now, to catch you up on the context of this interview, and I will talk to you afterwards as well, this interview came out, or was recorded, after I released the initial stories about Michael Tait and the 3 men who had been allegedly sexually assaulted, and after the Newsboys had responded. I don't believe we had yet got Michael Tait's confession, where he admitted to living a double life to the public in a social media post, and we had not yet read or seen the Guardian's report with the following allegations regarding 2 more men who have allegedly been sexually assaulted and groomed, one of them being a minor, and 4 more men acknowledging unwanted sexual advances. Alleged unwanted sexual advances, if I can term it in that way. So this interview was very, very early in the story of this breaking, but it will give you a context of my process in how I received the story, why I chose to pursue it, and what my initial response was to the public response, essentially, to this story, because people were so supportive of the survivors and these men who had courageously spoken to me. So right now you're about to hear my interview with Aidan Grant from 96.3 FM in Australia, and then I'll get back to you with a quick wrap up and we can talk about what's next.
It's Aidan and the Arvo on 96.3, and I want to give a little bit of a trigger warning for my next conversation I want to have with everyone, because there was a story that broke about a week ago now, maybe just shy, of the sad news lead singer of Newsboys, Michael Tait, who stepped away at the beginning of this year. And there wasn't too much sort of said around it, but he was stepping back from the band. And now it's since come out that he's been doing some pretty terrible things allegedly behind the scenes. We're talking sexual assault. We're talking, well, I won't get into all the details right now because I do have somebody joining me in the studio here that originally broke this news. There was an article that went up last week and she joins me in the studio. Jessica Morris, hello.
Hello, Aidan. Thank you for having me today.
Thank you for joining me. Now, have I explained this correctly? 20 years, give or take, there's been some terrible things done behind the scenes with Michael Tait and the Newsboys.
That's correct. Yes, according to my investigation, which went for 2.5 years, over the period of approximately 20 years, I heard stories from multiple survivors that Michael Tait allegedly sexually assaulted them and participated in potentially drugging them before doing so, things of that nature, I would say, without going into greater detail.
Yeah, okay, so this has been going for a very long time and this came out last week. Did you contact the Newsboys? Like, what's been their stance in this?
Yeah, absolutely. Probably about 4 days before we set to publish this story, we contacted the Newsboys, their management, and we said we're releasing a story about certain allegations and we would like to contact you. And we stated it was about Tait and just said, look, because he was affiliated with you for quite some time, we would like to talk to you. And they responded to us after we sent them some specific questions with a legal statement, which we included in the article. And basically, they just sort of said they were waiting for Tait to see how he would respond to it because it was his matter, and that they would leave that with him. It was very respectful.
Okay, so they kind of just passed the buck a little bit to him, saying, it's got nothing to do with us, it's all him.
Well, I would actually say, in fairness to the Newsboys, I would say, in terms of all three stories that I reported on, so from, I think, 2004, 2011 and 2014, I think it was around those times, in all those stories, none of the three survivors, the three men I talked to, or the corroborating witnesses stated that they had told Newsboys management or band members. So in fairness to Newsboys, they weren't going against any stories saying that they should know about this.
Okay. So how did you come to know about all of this?
Sure. So I am a Geelong local and I've worked in Christian media probably for over a decade now, I would say, living between here and Nashville. And I was actually in Nashville in 2022 doing some red carpet reporting for the Gospel Music Awards, for the Dove Awards. Mm-hmm. And while I was there, I just caught up with some industry friends, and one of them had just had a phone call with a friend who'd been really impacted by the band and by Tait. And he just said to me in desperation, can you do something about this? No one is doing anything. And so I sort of asked, well, what evidence do you have? And who was willing to talk? And he gave me quite a few credible leads and people who were willing to talk to me. And so it sort of felt like it was placed in my lap. And as long as the evidence was there and the truth was there, I was willing to chase that. And so for the last 2.5 years, I have been going over meticulous stories and details, trying to figure out what the truth is in these alleged situations, trying to figure out the backstory, why this has been kept quiet for so long, and why it's Nashville's essentially worst kept secret, when everyone in Nashville in the industry has an awareness of these rumours, which I can testify to having lived there, but no one has either reported on them yet, or nothing has publicly surfaced essentially until now.
I can't imagine this has been easy for you. I know for myself, I grew up listening to Newsboys. I grew up listening to DC Talk. I grew up loving this band, and I don't want to say idolizing, but definitely looking up to. And I imagine for yourself, it'll be the same. And for so many people, this has been a staple of Christian music for the last almost 40 years.
Oh, absolutely. I think there's so much gravity to the name Michael Tait, to DC Talk, and to Newsboys. These are formative names and sounds, not just in Christian music, but I would actually say like in our evangelical identity. Anyone who sort of probably grew up in the 80s onwards, even earlier, these are the sounds that defined our youth years, really. And sort of for a lot of people, there are stories about people coming to faith through these songs. And so hearing stories like this are heart-wrenching, because all of a sudden something that's been so pivotal to your faith experience, it really feels like it's being wrenched out from underneath you.
Yeah, I think as well, we always need to remember that we serve God, we worship God. It's not the people. And I think sometimes we can get wrapped up in putting our faith in people when the only person you can put your faith in is Jesus. And, you know, there's been so many stories. Newsboys are not the first. There's plenty of others in the past that have fallen along the way, whether they be in bands or, you know, mega church pastors. This is what happens when we unfortunately put our faith in people instead of our God.
Yeah, and I think that's also a really natural thing as humans for us to do.
Oh, absolutely.
Because I can also imagine, like, I can think of some of my favourite musicians that I still listen to this day, and if I was hearing stories like this about them, I would be absolutely devastated, and I would have to then go on the same journey that lots of people are now going on with the Newsboys and Tait, thinking, wait, what does this mean for me? And so we can know that our identity and our belief and our knowledge of God is separate to a person, but it's still a really
Emotionally,
hard job.
it's hard.
Emotionally, it's hard. Yeah.
What do you want to come from writing this article? Because it's out there. You've had a few follow-ups as well. It's been reported on a lot of news websites around the world now. What's the intention?
I think the intention from the beginning has been that we want to shine a light on some of the dark places in the Christian music industry, so that some of the darkness and things that aren't of God can hopefully be flushed out and make way for what is good and true and holy to move in and make this industry even brighter than it already is.
Because I think there would be a few people pointing a finger going, oh, don't make Christians look bad. Don't make us look bad. Can't you just forget about this?
Oh, absolutely. And I think that was one of the reasons that I ultimately chose with this story to publish with a Christian publication, because I wanted it to be a method of actually hopefully restoring or reforming the church or creating some sort of structure or accountability. And that's because, well, one, I'm a part of a local church. I also love Christian music. So it's that, but it's also the fact that nearly every single source that I've spoken to, so many of them are still in Christian music, and they kept saying to me, we don't want to lose this. We love this industry, but these things have to be called out. And so the point, I think, for me of publishing, and especially publishing with a credible Christian publication, was about saying, as the church, it's our job to be the one to call out when there's something happening in our ranks that isn't right and isn't godly. Before the secular media can do it, we should be able to do it ourselves.
I want people to know that we take no joy in talking about this. There's no part of this that is good. Like, it's just a terrible situation.
No, it's the worst.
That no one wins in this. But the Bible says the truth will set you free. And so these things do need to be talked about and need to be discussed in order for there to be freedom down the road.
Yeah, and I think there's also a tension. I imagine a tension for some people going, wait, a journalist broke this, the media broke this. I know that.
Yeah, because it hasn't actually gone through court cases or anything.
No, it hasn't.
No, so that's important to say.
So these are all allegations. These are all allegations, to be absolutely clear. And so we can't make any statements about people's character or their motives. We can just present the evidence that I had in the story.
Jess, where can people read the article if they haven't got across the news yet?
Sure. So you can read the article right now at The Roys Report. That is at julieroys.com, ROYS.
And there's a couple of articles out now for people to read their way through.
Yes, absolutely. So we have had a couple of follow-ups in that time, and we'll be dropping some more work in the next few days that you can keep track of.
Thank you so much for coming in and sharing with us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Aidan.
And I wanted to say as well, as far as 96.3 goes, you may or may not have noticed we haven't played any Newsboys or DC Talk for the last week or so since the news broke, and we'll continue to do so until we see fit to add them back into rotation, if at all.
Okay, did you enjoy having two Aussie accents at once? I mean, I guess for me that's pretty normal, but I know that that's fun. I don't think enjoyed that interview is the right word. Let's be honest, this story, this content is not nice for anybody, right? And in an ideal world, this never should have had to be written. These events never should have happened in any capacity, in any industry, and yet they did. And so while I talk about this, I talk about it in a sense of sadness, because I sort of, and I think I might have alluded to it in the interview with Aidan, I sort of see journalism and at least my role as a journalist as like the sort of like the very last maybe step for like justice to happen, because there should have been, in my mind at least, a million options and opportunities for accountability and asking for help and saying no and choosing no. You know, I would even include like things like going to the police and going to all these other avenues before you hit going to a media outlet, right? On no planet is it nice for a survivor of this sort of behaviour to have to relive and reshare their trauma to a journalist and then have it shared with the entire world, knowing that there are going to be a bunch of people who don't believe you, knowing that people may figure out who you are, knowing that you could lose everything, knowing that you are now reliving something that you've probably done a lot of work to heal from, but you're choosing to do it because you feel like it's right to speak up now. And that's sort of what I saw my role as in this story, in breaking these stories about Michael Tait. For some of these people, as we went on and released more stories, some of these people went to the police and looked for justice that way, right? And some of these people at the time didn't realise what was happening to them. They only realised afterwards, or they decided that their best course of action was letting it go or just protecting themselves. And you know what I found is that a lot of people didn't realise that they were the only one. It took years for people, or even me talking to them, for them to realise that this was what I have seen as systemic behaviour. And so in those cases, people are often thinking, well, I don't want to speak out about this because what if I am outing someone's sexuality without their consent. And to date, Michael Tait has never spoken about his sexuality publicly. I have no authority to speak about that here on his behalf. I can talk about his behaviour and his actions, but that's it. And so there is this level of complexity for survivors where some of them have felt like all their attempts to speak up and seek justice have been squashed. And there are others who have literally thought, well, I thought he was my friend, or I thought he had my back, or if I speak up now, my career is stuffed, is screwed, is not going to happen in Christian music, or like, wait, maybe he didn't mean it, but he did, and honestly, there is facets to this story and facets to each of the stories of the survivors, men and the woman that I've talked to, where you have to really understand the nuance in a way that even I can't, but you have to understand the nuance of what it means to be sexually abused and to be groomed and to be in an abusive relationship in different facets in different ways. So in some of these cases, the responses of these people, you may listen to them or have read them and been like, why didn't they do that? Why didn't they ask for help earlier? Why didn't they speak up? And you know what? The fact is that if we go back to the start, this never should have happened to them. They never should have even had to make a decision if they were going to speak up or not, because they shouldn't have been put in this position. It doesn't matter what they were consuming. It doesn't matter what environment they were in. They never should have been harmed. That is just fact, right? But the thing is that when you understand the context of what sexual abuse is, what sexual assault is, what grooming is, when you look into that, it's far more intricate because there are emotional ties here and power at play that we can't understand unless we are in that position. And so if you sort of have read this and like, I don't understand the response by people, you know what? It's okay. You don't have to understand their response. At the time, for a lot of these people, they were doing the best they could with what they had. And when it came to a point where I approached them and asked them if they'd be willing to share their story, often not knowing the full context of their story. Honestly, it was through mutual sources, mutual friends, like that I'd met as sources. It was actually a case sort of going, my gut tells me there's something here and I'm going to ask you to trust me and share it. And in some cases, it was them telling me their story and then being like, okay, are we going to print with this or are we not going to print with this? Because it's a lot, right? It's a lot. And basically what it came down to was sort of talking to, when I talk about sources broadly, it's a way of protecting them. It's a way of not identifying them, particularly in cases of sexual assault. Ethically, as a journalist, I don't want to name someone who has been sexually assaulted or abused, just out of respect for them, out of the fact that they shouldn't have to be made to relive this trauma more than what has already happened. They've consented to sharing their story publicly, but unless they've chosen to share their name, that's a choice. And that's something I was really grateful that the Roy's Report and Julie Roy's chose to do. But basically, when it came to talking to these sources and to these survivors, particularly, it was about saying to them, I know you've never met me before, but I'm asking you to trust me because someone else that you know and trust trusts me. It was often deferred trust, and that's how this story worked. Nashville is a close community. The Christian music industry is a close community. Even for those who have left, they're still part of it. They still have connections with it. And if you trust someone in that industry, that trust goes deep. It goes deep because these people have experienced a lot. And that's just part of life on the road. It's part of life on tour. And it's part of witnessing the front and the beautiful shiny parts of fame and the underbelly of it and the pain of it. And so what I found was that when people trusted me, they would then say, I know someone who may want to talk to you. And they would make that connection, and that's where that trust was built. And so while I am really grateful, and I don't think proud's the right word because, like I said at the start, these stories shouldn't have to exist. I know that I did my best work in this and I continue to try and strive to do my best work, particularly when I'm sharing stories like this. It's not an understatement to say that these stories could not have happened without every single source that I spoke to. And at this point, we're talking more than 60 sources over the course of 2.5 years, some on the record, some off, some deep background. I had people who chose to step up and be really courageous and speak to me when, especially in our early days, when the fear was that if word got back to the wrong people, they could be blackballed from the industry. And that would not just impact them personally, but it would impact their families, it would impact their paycheck. So I can't overemphasize just how pivotal every source has been to this story. And at this point, there are so many, I need to speak about them in a group, but that has been where the real courage has been in this process. So I've been on this trail for 2.5 years, but the vast majority of my sources have been on that with me the entire time. They have held on. It has been hard. And there's been times when they've been like, Jessica, what's happening? What's the next move? And I've been working away, trying to stick pieces together so that I make sure that I have absolutely 100% factual evidence, so that I have all my ducks in a row, so that I know beyond reasonable doubt that what we have is not just truthful and honest and corroborated and full of integrity. That's key for me, but is also something that is going to honour the stories of these survivors and these witnesses, so that I do my best professionally, but I also honour what they are sharing with me. And that means pushing and pushing and pushing. And that is one of the reasons this took 2.5 years, because we could have reported on this after a month, but you wouldn't have had the background evidence and you wouldn't have had that amount of sources, and I wouldn't have had the detail that I now have. And we sort of came to a point where in sharing this and going on this journey, I knew that I was staking my entire professional career on it as a journalist. And that's the fact. And that's been the hardest thing for me as we've processed this story, has not just been the emotional toll of hearing these stories, and that's nothing compared to what the survivors have gone through, to be abundantly clear. But the impact for me after these stories released was actually being strong enough to take the people who said, that's not real journalism, you didn't do your job right. It was me learning not to take that personally, because that was brutal, especially when you feel like you've staked your career on it, when you've poured hundreds of hours into this, and when you've paid for it with your physical and mental and emotional and spiritual health, and when you have gone above and beyond to the best of your capabilities to push for this and fight for this. That's the hardest part. And not everyone's going to understand that, and not everyone's going to agree with that, and I can't change it. But on a professional level, that has been the hardest part for me. And then that's when I have to remember, this isn't about me, this is about the survivors, and this is about making sure that this behaviour is no longer acceptable in Christian music. And that's ultimately why I did it, and it's ultimately why the survivors did it. And in all that, the fact is, the end goal has always been, how can we make Christian music safer? And there's an element where you go, okay, Jessica, who are you to talk about this? There are so many other people in Christian music who have done the hard yards for decades, right? There are people who have sung to millions of people, who have accomplishments and achievements that I couldn't even fathom. And there are people behind the scenes who have made that happen. There is blood and sweat and tears for tons of people who will never get accolades in Nashville. And honestly, they have that life experience, and they have, in some cases, the influence to say, we must make Christian music safer. And some of them have done that in their own camps in a way that's so full of integrity, in a way that's so intentional. I have learned so much about the goodness of God in Christian music through this process. But ultimately what it came down to was the fact that even though people in some camps in Christian music were safe, there were other camps that aren't safe. And for some reason, I could not figure out why, in my head on a personal level, why this was still being allowed to happen in any capacity. And that's why I chose to follow this through. And that's why my sources chose to follow this through, broadly speaking. The vast majority of them did it because they love Christian music. They love the Christian music industry. They love their friends, they love their community, and they love the next generation who is coming up in Christian music. And the whole time they would emphasize to me, we do not want to destroy this industry. We want to make it safe. We want to call it to account. We want this to be an industry that reflects the heart of God more so than it does now, because there are so many good things in Christian music, but there's also been an underbelly to it that is not acceptable. And so this, at least their story and my story in the middle of this, is we must speak up in order for change to happen. Can we ensure that happens? No. Something I had to grapple with through the whole time, but particularly right towards the end of this story. I had a colleague say to me, you need to prepare yourself for the fact that nothing may change after you break this story. And that was heart-wrenching. And still is a heart-wrenching fact, because the fact is you can release fact, you can pour your heart into it, you can have courageous people and survivors speak up, but the wheels of change don't happen through someone saying it. They happen when other people put that in action. Now, I know I'm willing to put that in action, but I also know that I don't live in Nashville. And so it's going to take a bunch of really brave, courageous decisions from a lot of really brave people to enact change. And that's not to say those people aren't already doing good, worthy, God-fearing things. But I think it's going to take some extra oomph if we want to see this cleared up from Christian music. Because what we're seeing in these stories right now is some of the worst, right? But it doesn't just start with sexual abuse or getting allegedly drugged and then allegedly sexually assaulted. It starts with derogatory comments. It starts with the fact that females are seen as the problem and as stumbling blocks for men. It starts with the fact that people are contractors. And so when they're contractors, they have limited options about who they can go to ask for help or to report events. And people are limited in terms of, well, if their leadership or the person they're talking to doesn't then report what they're saying, they're stuck. Because if they say the wrong thing to the wrong person, then what if their career is pulled because they've made a scene, quote unquote, for speaking the truth? And that's how complex and nuanced this is. And so it's really a case at this point of continuing to pray, please pray. And it's a case of asking people to the best of their abilities, like I'm also trying to do in my life, please, to make the best next decision for yourself, for God, to honour God, and for the people around you. Because ultimately, in the end, lives are still being saved. They will always be saved through Christian music. That's a non-negotiable. God will always move. He will use things to bring people to him. But in my mind, if we have a dichotomy where we have a bunch of people on stage, a bunch of people who are being saved, an altar call at a Christian concert, and then this very same evening or somewhere else in Christian music industry, someone being assaulted or allegedly drugged, allegedly raped by people who profess the name of Jesus, that's not good enough. We can't have both things. We can't worship golden calves and then sing worship choruses to Jesus. And that's not an allusion to politics. Please know that. That's just about the Bible. We all do it, but at the moment, we need to, at least this is my heart, we need to be brave. And so I know there are a lot of people in Christian music right now who are scared because they're scared about what the future of the industry looks like. And I hear that. And my hope and my prayer as like just one person, one journalist in Australia who before these last 2 weeks no one knew about, my prayer is that people turn that sense of being uncomfortable into conviction, to continue doing the good work they're doing, but to also be brave enough to speak up maybe for the people around them who can't, who are squashed, who are unheard. There are so many different levels of influence in Christian music. If you have any, then use it for good, for more good than what you were already doing, please. Because I know your heart is in this. That monologue went a lot bigger than expected. It turned into actually like 3 TED Talks. At this point, if you're listening, thank you. You got some background story and you got my heart behind it. We'll see how that lands. But as I said to someone today, my goal in this whole process has been to respect people and respect the humanity of them, to remember the image of God in each person. Very rarely do we have straight heroes and like a strict hero, a villain. People are nuanced. People don't turn from one to the other in a heartbeat. There are so many different pieces happening here. And so I am super aware that there are people's livelihoods at stake here. There are families, there are partners. And so I carry my duty as a journalist and as a Christian so heavily. And I'm playing it out, doing it, writing these things, researching them, interviewing with the integrity that I expect of myself. I'm trying so hard to uphold that in every aspect of what I do. I want the best for people. I want the best for people in Christian music. But I also know that our God is a God of justice. And so part of telling the truth and bringing that to light is actually what God asks to do in the Bible. God says that he will bring the truth to light, that what is dark will be made light, right? That's part of God's mercy and justice. People can only repent and ask for mercy and receive that grace from God if we're willing to confront the darkness in front of us. And that's the opportunity we have in Christian music right now. It's not all dark. There is so much good in Christian music. We know that, but we have to be willing to confront the darkness that has been held here or covered up for so long, even if we weren't aware of it. We need to be willing to confront that and say, what am I going to do to make sure that doesn't happen in my sphere of influence? Because that's only when we will see change. And I don't know about you, but I will not stand to see the next generation of young Christian musicians or crew members or volunteers or stall holders or tech guys or whatever. I will not stand to have them taken advantage of in the name of Christ when they are going in with wide eyes and a hope and ambition to change the world and create beautiful craft. This should be the safest place on earth for them. Instead, it's not. It's the antithesis of that in some cases, from what I have heard in my stories and these stories that you've heard through the Roy's Report. So we need to make a change. That's why I did this. And so if you're in Christian music and you've been like, oh, I don't know if I can trust this girl, I get it. I'm a journalist. We're taught not to trust journalists. But my prayer is that you would hold the facts and that you would see my heart for the safety and protection of the most vulnerable among us, and that you would continue to walk in the ways of God, no matter what that takes. All right, that's all from me today, but before I go, I'm going to be doing another episode, a bit like this, sharing an interview that I've done, answering some questions. So instead of me talking on my soapbox for like 30 minutes about what my story and what I've done, I thought it'd be more fun, or maybe more interesting, honestly, for you guys if you actually had the chance to ask me some questions. So if you would like to submit a question so that I can answer it, if you were curious about something to do with this story, if you'd like to know the process of how I heard about it, if you heard something today, you're like, what does that mean? Or can you tell me more about what the process is of journalism? What is on record, off record? What was the process for survivors? Why didn't they choose to go to the police instead of coming to me? All of those type of questions, or something I've completely missed, please send me your questions. There are a few ways you can do that. You can email us at betweenyouandmepod@gmail.com, or you can DM us on Facebook or Instagram at betweenyoumepod. Now, I will be accepting questions for our next episode until midnight on Thursday, June 26th, Central Daylight Saving Time, and then we'll get an episode out in the following days answering some of those questions. So just a reminder, you can email us, you can email me at betweenyouandmepod@gmail.com, or you can direct message me at betweenyoumepod on Instagram. You'll also find us on Facebook. All the links, I always say this, all the links are in the show notes, so just click on those show notes and you'll follow through. While I'm here, I would be remiss not to say, if you are interested in hearing more about the stories that hurt, heal, and change us in Christian culture are often a lot lighter than what we've been discussing today. If you love hearing behind the scenes in the Christian music industry and how so many artists have overcome a great deal, have experienced God's grace, have overcome healing, have battled through addiction, all sorts of things, then please subscribe now to the Between You and Me podcast. We are on all major platforms. Just hit subscribe. And if you do enjoy our episodes, you'll find a backlog on your podcast provider with a bunch of different artists and creatives. Please do give us a review. We'd really appreciate this, and share it with your friends. So that's all I have for today, but do send me your questions and I will answer some of them for you very shortly. At the moment, I always end an episode saying here's to hope. And honestly, at the moment, it feels like we need that. So here's to hope. And here's to a good God who is just and kind and true and can do anything. I'll see you next time.